everyone, and welcome to the keynote panel this morning. Apologies for the slight delay, having a couple of minor connection issues, which we'll be making sure we're sorting out in the next couple of minutes. The title of this morning's session is Growth Capital to List or Not to List? That is the question. So I think it's a conversation that's been had in a few of the sessions over the last day and this morning's presentation from McKinsey as well, one that's quite critical to the region. So delighted to have a panel and a bit of a debate to go on this morning, which I'm looking forward to. Please do keep your questions coming in the live discussion box the bottom right of your screen, and we'll get to as many throughout the discussion as we can. But for now, delighted to hand over to the moderator for today's discussion, Don Dibithesi. So Don, the stage is yours.
Thank you very much, Josh. It's a pleasure to be here, and it's a pleasure to be with everyone virtually. What I'd like to do is just introduce myself very briefly. I'm Don Dibithesi, a serial entrepreneur, been in biotech both in the US and now in Europe for the last 8 years. And I'm serving on 6 boards, including Saniona, which is listed on the Swedish NASDAQ, and also on the argenx board, which is also dual listed, which we'll talk a little bit about today. With that, I'll turn it over to Lena to introduce herself.
Right, so my name is Lena Söderström, and my background is more than 30 years within the life science sector. First 15 years with big pharma and medtech, and then 15 years as CEO of different small, medium-sized enterprises. And during those years, I worked a lot with international projects, raised funds, done several IPOs. And recently, I'm focusing more and more on business coaching and board work, mainly with SMEs. So I serve at 7 boards, 2 as chairman and 5 as member of the board.
Thank you, Lena. Stefan?
Yeah, good morning. I'm Stefan Kriskau. I'm one of the founding partners of IR Ventures, which is the newest of the life science venture funds in the Nordics. We are not that many. We can come back to that during the panel here today. I have a background as a scientist, a PhD in protein chemistry and immunology, and have been operationally involved in a number of biotech companies. I was also part of starting NovoSeeds before I joined the new enterprise here in IR Ventures.
Thank you. Jonas?
Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm Jonas Jendi. I have a business training. I used to work in management consulting a long time ago, but my formative years were as a CEO of a startup coming out of the Karolinska doing cognitive training. So we built the business for 8 years until the exit. Then I got back to Sweden and worked in the finance sector and on the board for a few biotech companies before joining Industrifonden, where I'm now an investment director and head of the analysis team. And we, of course, are a VC fund active since more than 20 years as a VC fund, focusing on the Nordics with a large presence in the life sciences sector.
Very good. Thank you. And thanks for each of you being willing to be here today. So just to kick things off, the question in front of us is, should companies be listing publicly? And we have this very unique market in Sweden and very successful market. And with its, some challenges across the growth spectrum. So we'll talk about those today. But I thought it would be very helpful to start out with Lena this morning, because Lena has extensive experience in the Swedish market and some very interesting perspectives. So Lena, it's all yours.
Right, thank you. Well, yeah, of course, it's a big difference to list a small company or a large one. And I have mainly experienced them from small ones. So I have done several IPOs in the medtech and pharma business. And of course, I mean, the most important thing, value being listed, is the access of money. But there are other things as well. I mean, you get attention to your brand. And I think the main thing with the companies I have listed is actually to get the speed up our growth. That has been the most important thing. And don't forget actually that you could use your shares to make acquisitions. I have done that in several companies, and I think it's an excellent way to grow. So yeah, that's more or less the value being listed, I would say. Do you want me, Don, to go in a little bit more of preparations and
Yeah,
challenges
I
as well?
think
Or
I think it
should
would
we?
be helpful for the audience to know what's involved in that, and also sort of your now longer term perspective on whether everyone should be listening. We'll get a little bit more into that with Stefan and Jonas as to how do you mature a company,
Right.
and a little bit of insight into the what it means to be public.
Right. Yeah. If we start a little bit around the preparations, of course, you need a very good IPO story. You need a corporate story, and you need a powerful investment case. And then you also, something that is often underestimated, you need to present it in an understandable way. I mean, I think all of you have seen presentations. Actually, you don't even understand what the business model look like. So don't underestimate the preparations actually with the corporate story and the powerful investment case, I would say. And then I think some company actually have it like the final goal, so to say, to list your company. But of course you should celebrate. It's an important milestone, but it's actually when the journey starts. Afterwards, you have been listing. So it's a lot of preparations. And also regarding challenges, I think communication and information is so important, both internally and externally. If we start a little bit with the internal information, I think my own experience is for a small company, you maybe underestimate that the staff is, they have all information, they know everything. But then when you go listed, you have to follow a lot of rules, and then you cannot have everything known in the organization. And for some people this is quite unusual. You are not maybe feeling you're motivated in the same way. So this is something that both the CEO and management really have to think of. And of course, all the external communication, it's so important. It depends. If you have sales, then it's easier. You can create an interesting news flow. But if you have other milestones, it's so important too to actually focus on this all the time. And the CEO will be working a lot with it. It's a lot of time-consuming work actually. You will be exposed. You have to be prepared to be scrutinized in another way. So you definitely internally need to formalize your external communication with press releases, of course, but also news flow, webinars, and so on, so that you keep an interest in the share. Otherwise, it's really tough.
Yeah, Lena, I think you're hitting onto an important point about the difference between private and public. Is in a biotech company that's development focused, and they may be preclinical, they may be just getting started in the clinic. There can be very long periods between value creation, and there's an expectation. My experience is there's an expectation that the companies should create news flow while they're moving along on these value generating milestones. But there's also a philosophy in the public markets that you can't promote the stock with non-news.
Right.
How do you handle that?
But it's one thing. Yeah, it's one thing with real press releases, but I think you have to be smart as well. You have to plan like the whole, formalize the wheelhouse for the year, so to say. So use the AGM. Use the different opportunities to create like a news flow. The press release flow is one thing, but really have maybe other interesting news about the company to keep up the interest.
Yeah, I think it's a good point, but it's also reinforces the fact that this is what you have to do when you have public shareholders. You're not dealing with 4 or 5 VCs. You're dealing with a whole host of unknown people often. That's very helpful. And I think it'll be a good segue to talk a little bit, because you've raised an important issue, is a lot of smaller companies are not prepared for what it really means to be public, because, a lot of people they're not experienced. They haven't done this before. it seems like it. And you also mentioned that it seems like the end of the journey, but it's not. It's just actually just beginning when you do that. So, Stefan, I think it would be helpful to give your perspective of the value of keeping a company private with the right kind of leadership.
Yeah, well, I think there are some good points here already. And indeed, an IPO could be an excellent choice for a company. It's a means to an end. It could be a means to finance. It could be a means to create awareness, but it's not the sole goal. And I think the fact that we have this unique situation on the markets in Stockholm, where so many biotech companies have listed, is probably also a reflection that the access to specialist venture capital has been sparse here in the region. There is less than 2 handful of investors. And when you think about it, in the EU, the 2 top universities for medical innovation is Karolinska Innovation Institute in Stockholm, and it's Copenhagen University in Copenhagen. These are the 2 top medical innovation universities in the EU. So there's a lot of innovation, a lot of great opportunities, a lot of very compelling products being developed, and there is so little specialist capital. So that means that people have gone the route, and to some extent, almost in Sweden, it has become the sort of established route for a small company. And I think not only all the things that a public company has to be aware is a challenge, but also a company have to get this challenge from the start. There has to be someone with a professional insight to what it takes to develop a drug, who can challenge the companies on their IP strategy, on their regulatory strategy. Is it the right clinical indication? How do they approach this? This is really, really something that is requiring a lot of insight and a lot of knowledge. And that's where venture capital comes in. Venture capital works with our portfolio companies, work with giving access to other investors, to networks of specialists, to challenge the plans of the company. So you create value on a more sort of profound background, and thus becomes ready once the time is there, where an IPO can be one of the choices for the future development of the company. And I think many companies in Scandinavia, they skip this maturation stage because they don't see venture capital. It's very difficult for them. It's easier to go out to get raise 10, 20 million SEK from families and friends and wealthy individuals. And that means they're immature in their, you can say, the internal plans, the development, and they're immature with regard to the preparation to be public. The latter, there are providers that can help you, right? You can hire sort of press agencies, or you can hire lawyers that bring your governance up to speed. But you don't get from the public market this pressure on your development strategy, on all the sort of complicated stuff that comes with being a biotech company. And that's why I see that many companies, they could have benefited from sort of private ownership with specialist owners that know what it takes to develop a drug. And I could sort of be a little bit afraid of too many companies having lacked that phase in their development, which I think is important.
I think that's very insightful, Stefan. And I have recently, over the last couple of years, done some coaching of the CEOs that have a couple of CEOs and actually a board, coaching a board where they have gone into the market and without the maturation and trying to get them to recognize what they need to do. But it's not the same as having investors in private venture investors who do this over and over and over again. I think that's a very valuable asset to have. But you hit the nail on the head at the beginning, and which is there's a scarcity of capital, and I like that. I like that image of they're just 2 handfuls and of VCs available for these young companies. So it's actually quite a miracle almost that this early stage market has developed in Sweden. And before I turn it over to Jonas, because I want to let Jonas take it a little bit further is, Lena, you had made a comment during our preparation about that there's so many companies rushing into this, because we have a lot of innovation. I didn't realize that the two top universities in the EU for innovation were right here in Sweden and Denmark. So you can see that we've got we've started this, the people are coming out of the gate now. Lena, what's your observation about these companies coming into this public market?
Yeah, but I think that it's mostly positive, I would say, even though I agree with you, Stefan, that some companies are not mature. But, we have a fantastic innovation system. So, of course, there are a lot of companies coming up. And, I think, mainly it's a good thing. But, of course, you have to be precautious so you don't go too early. But I think the innovation system also could help you, actually. There are some accelerators and so on, incubators, where you can attend some courses and try to find people that have done it before that could help you. You don't have to do everything by yourself, You can surround yourself with people that have done it before. So
I think that was the point I was hoping you would make. Is the innovation system both in Denmark and in Sweden. And Jonas, you had some interesting observations about this market, and it would be very helpful to hear your opinion about from a VC's perspective of whether you should go public or not.
Yeah, no, I think it's very important to think about what perspective you're taking when you look at this issue, because this can be discussed from many different directions. I mean, we are a VC, and to us, the IPO market or the stock market is a funding route. We participate in IPOs in our portfolio companies. We support them in raising substantial amounts, and it's worked very well for us in a number of occasions. So on that side, that's our relationship to the stock market, and it's worked very well, and it's very important. Not as exits primarily or in the first step, but as funding mechanism for companies that we have worked with and nurtured in many cases over many years together with other VCs, such as in the case of Evolution or BoneSupport. There were syndicates of VCs working many years, investing substantial amounts of money, and then an IPO, and then even more money being raised, and then things hopefully turning out well. So that's one part of the ecosystem, which is working well, I think, and very, very important. But then there's the other part where the companies enter much earlier and do not go by way of the nurturing / pressurizing that the VCs can provide. And that's a system that is unique, arguably, in the world that we have here. And I think one important thing to think about is this system now has existed for a while. So it's not new. I worked at Redeye back in 2013, and I learned the term the IPO window is open, because that was in the fall of 2013, the window flung open and things were great. And it's been pretty open now for 8 years. So I think it's time to look at sorry?
It's open.
It is open, I know. And it has been for a while. That's the point, that's why we're here. What my point is that it's been open for a good number of years, and now we have a system and we can look at how does it turn out. It's not just a matter of IPOs, it's what happens after the IPOs. And I think one big question we should ask ourselves is, what are the examples of companies that have done a journey that others can emulate, a journey that others would like to see would like to do themselves? And my concern, the point I wanted to make here, is that we do not have a large number of such examples. We have a large number of IPOs, but we do not have a large number of examples of companies that have built themselves up by doing a small or smallish IPO and then raising more money, attracting institutional investors, which is the big goal and the big challenge, as all the CEOs on the stock market know. And we don't have all that many examples. And I think the system, and we talk about a system, is very much in need of more such examples. And in the absence of them, I think new companies coming in, look at an IPO, should ask themselves, okay, what are my odds once I'm inside? Once I've done the IPO, done the money, got the money, what are my odds of being one of the few that do the journey? So that is a question I think we as part of the system should ask ourselves.
Yeah, I think having success stories in the market is important, and as you said, that we only have a handful of very significant companies that have come all the way through the system. we have companies now in between. And you had talked a little bit before about consolidation, as an idea to help companies that get public. They go public to get that initial financing that Lena talked about. They don't have the maturation, and they have some kind of setback, or they're just overwhelmed. And some interest or some ideas that you had around consolidation.
Well, this is just ideas and not obviously the focus of our work at Industrifonden, but it's a point that people often make, that there are so many companies listed and they have they share a lot of characteristics, and combining them could make sense. But having said that, how that would actually be done is not the question, because once they're listed, it's not easy to buy out, to take private such a company. So I'm not particularly recommending it to anyone, but I think there is a bit of a fragmentation of talent, to put it that way. I think there is Sweden or the Nordics is a fairly small market, and there's only a certain amount of excellent talent by definition, and it's being deployed in quite a few number of early stage therapeutics companies. So some consolidation of effort, I think, could be valuable. That would be my perspective on that. But in terms of the examples, I think the next part of the example story is not just who is doing the climbing, who's raising more money, building valuation and progressing, of course, clinically, but also what are the M&A examples that really can inspire the system. And I think there are some examples, such as the Wilson acquisition it's almost 4 years ago. I think it was November 2017 or something. A new evolution that I mentioned in summer of 19, but it's been a while, and I think the system really needs examples of such M&A deals, not just the biggest ones, but it would be even better if some of the smaller ones, the younger ones, were acquired by big pharma or whoever, basically at a good premium to their share price. I mean, that's what this is really about. That's what this is the business we're in, but it doesn't happen very often.
Exactly. As an example, there's a company I'm familiar with, Cereno Scientific, that's on First North, and they did a value-adding partnership with Abbott to utilize their device in their cardiovascular work. And I thought that was a very wise thing to do, because they're not, it's not an acquisition deal. But it provided a tremendous amount of interest and validation for the company. I think it's a good example of in a public forum panel we did yesterday. We were just talking about the importance of doing deals with pharma, and that's another way to bring money into the company and progress and keep people interested in the value of the assets. Adam, thank you for being able to join us. I know you're a busy guy today. And what we'd like to do now is, if you could just introduce yourself briefly. I think most people know you, but it can't hurt. And then you were going to give some perspective on numbers to us. So why don't we do that now?
Yeah, so thanks, Don, and hi, Jonas, hi, Stefan, hi, Lena. Great to be part of this discussion. And of course, as Jonas said, the window is open and has been for quite some time. But my responsibility at NASDAQ is really, we own and operate 7 exchanges in the Nordics. On these exchanges, we have First North and Main Market, and I'm responsible for both companies joining the market or entering into the market and then listed on our platform over time. And then I also support European companies accessing the US market. And in particular within this sector, that's a very active space on a yearly basis, both with primary listing and dual listings, companies that grow in their local market and then decide to take the next step. Calliditas is one recent example of such a transition of a Nordic company, but we have many Israeli, French, German, Dutch companies that do this on a yearly basis. Now, from my perspective, the numbers are astonishing when you look at the Nordic level. Traditionally, this sector represents roughly 40% of listing activities on each exchange. So it's on a global basis. This sector is more active than others, particularly if you look at NASDAQ US, and then if you look at the NASDAQ Nordic platform. What makes our NASDAQ Nordic platform exceptional is the listing activity and the ability to list smaller companies. And when I say small, we're talking about what would potentially be defined as microcap. Because I think the definition of small in the US is everything under $750 million US. And on average, 90% of our listed companies that list with us, and we're talking, this year we've listed 120 so far, are below the market cap of 600 million euros. So roughly so we are really a small mid cap, small micro cap environment if you look at it from a global perspective. Now, is this good or is this bad? Now, from our perspective, I think NASDAQ First North has developed fantastically. I mean, we've taken it together with the market and become really quite a credible platform for even, the largest listing that we had before summer was a 30 billion Swedish company, a 30 billion market cap company, not with in health tech space. They are in the pet business, but they serve the pets with veterinary services. So from my perspective, the fact that you can actually do a 30 billion SEK listing on First North just goes to show the depth of the market overall and the appetite to support growth companies. On the other hand, you have a $10 million US company listing. And then the question is that good or is that bad? From my perspective, I think, we have to fundamentally redefine what NASDAQ First North is. It's either a very mature exchange on the one end, and on the other hand, it's replacing risk capital that is not accessible in the market. And it's really up to the investors to decide what they want to invest in. It's not for us as an exchange to determine what is a viable business or not. What we want to make sure is that companies are in a good space to be able to manage the responsibility of the investors or the relationship of the investors that they engage with and the regulatory burden that is put on them. Having said that, this sector is in a phenomenal position to do so, because if they can't manage regulatory requirements, then they shouldn't probably be in this business overall. So I think from that perspective, I think even though many of these companies are very lean and efficient in terms of admin, the fact of managing regulatory burdens that comes with the financial market are not necessarily an additional burden that overweighs their underlying business. And in many cases, it actually replaces risk capital that they're not able to access. And maybe it also gives an additional comfort to risk capital because they know that this is a tradable asset. It's not an illiquid asset that will remain illiquid for a long time, but rather maybe a potential asset that they could trade depending on how the market lives up to expectations. But our success is not measured by number of companies coming to market. Our success is managed by the quality of the companies and the sustainability of these companies and how they develop over time, because otherwise we would be shutting down market pretty soon. And I think that is the proof that although there have been examples of companies that have not lived up to expectations, the overwhelming development has been a positive one. And therefore we have repeat entrepreneurs who come and IPO, we have repeat investors that come and seek for new opportunities. And we have seen fantastic growth stories come from nothing and develop into fantastic developments. And many of these have then taken the road to grow from First North to the main market. So we've had 100 companies transition from First North to main market, and then potentially taking on the next step of going to the US and timing that with the next stage of their development. So I see it really as a ladder, and many markets do not have that ladder and they do not have that first step. And that creates a vacuum in many of the markets. So that's my overall reflection. We are having a record year, both in the US and here in the Nordics, Stockholm in particular. The ecosystem that has been able to create in terms of the number of companies has allowed more research, more analyst coverage, better understanding amongst investors. So I think we're finally reaching a point where the peer community is creating also knowledge base. which could be potentially better, but is probably on par better than many other European markets today.
Adam, I think that's probably one of the best overviews I've heard of the value of these markets, and I want to thank you for that. We have a question from Annette about how do we solve this squeeze of lacking early stage funding, and one thing that I know that people, one of the unique things about Scandinavia is that it has very high tax rates. So the government pulls a lot of money to itself and then it uses that money. And I have been urging in Denmark, the government to use their pension funds. And I would say the same thing in Sweden. I think there's probably more of it in Sweden, but using more capital as risk capital, I think would be an important way to provide alternatives to going public and maybe some capital. And Stefan, I don't know, I think you've been involved at one time or another around the Nova Foundation, of course. That's not exactly government money, but it's a large fund that's created a unique ecosystem for venture funding through that platform. But I know and then the BII is another avenue for this, for doing this. And I know that Karolinska and, there's a whole ecosystem there providing capital. Stefan, could you comment on this? What are some additional ways we can deal with this scarcity so not everyone has to go public?
Yes. So, and Don, you mentioned one of the red flags for me, the pension funds and their complete lack of commitment to this sector, which is amazing. I mean, this is an industry of tremendous importance and with tremendous opportunity, and yet they are completely shying away from any investment in it. I think also to where we started here, Annette's question on the bridge between the early companies and the eventual IPO, if that is the route. The natural answer to me is obviously venture capital, where there is I talked about the sort of the ability of venture to sort of focus the company, but also to give the company an international perspective. I think a natural progression in a company, it starts up with some good research. It can go into an incubator. And yes, the Novo Nordisk Foundation has funded BII here in Copenhagen. There is Karolinska Innovation. There are incubators at most universities where it can sort of nurture the very first steps. And there are also some funding, the first couple of million SEK you can get in Sweden from Vinnova, in Denmark from Vækstfonden, and similar kind of partly government funded programs. But then there is a big bridge or a big gap or whatever you call it between that stage and a mature stage. And that's where venture capital come in. I think in the absence of venture capital, many companies, as we've discussed here, they have either turned to private rounds or listing in the micro cap. And admittedly, yes, the ecosystem is unique. Adam, you didn't mention the Spotlight stock exchange, which I know is not NASDAQ, but nevertheless exists, where companies can list. And
the ladder, just to jump in there, Stefan, because the ladder goes beyond First North. The ladder is, we have Spotlight, which is even micro cap, but still we have roughly 10 to 12 companies on a yearly basis that graduate from that micro cap ladder into First North and then move on. And again, fantastic that we have this ecosystem. It's difficult to explain. I'm in Berlin today. Yeah. And it's when you explain that to the German market, where they had 12 listings last year.
Yeah, no, I mean, it is unique and it is a good avenue, but it's to some extent have become such everybody knows this. So there is maybe a lack of awareness of what venture capital can do. I can certainly testify to the difficulty that emerging venture funds have in attracting investments here from the region. IR Ventures, we would not have existed if the government funds have not stepped in. So again, Don, I think if something could be done here, pressuring the pension funds, they certainly should not invest directly because they don't have the capabilities to do diligence on companies. But if they just allocated a tiny fraction of their funds to professional investors, and that would really be a game changer for the whole sort of ecosystem of professional investors, which I think, yeah.
I was just going to say that leads, that actually leads into a question asked by Peter Jensen here. Is that the markets are awash in capital from some perspectives. And maybe there's modern ways to get access to capital. We're talking about one that we might be able to stimulate better with the pension funds. But Peter's question is how to get access to capital in modern ways. I'm not quite sure what modern ways he's referring to, but any ideas there, Jonas?
Maybe he's thinking of SPACs, but I want to just say that first of all, I agree very much with what Stefan is saying. I think that we should all in the industry really push the case for VCs. I mean, obviously, Adam, you make a very good case for the unique system that we have in the Nordics, and it is unique, it's very powerful and very impressive in many ways. But from a strictly biotech or therapeutics perspective, I mean, we really cannot yet congratulate ourselves. I don't think that there has been enough M&A and great, fantastic exits that really spurred the system in the space of Swedish, at least, therapeutics. So that's what we need to really get things going and take things to the next level. And again, the examples that exist, like Wilson and Evolutions, they are companies that were set up by, or not set up, but nurtured and supported by VCs. So that arguably supports the case that the VCs are key in making this work. But I think the other thing that we should keep in mind when we look at the system that we have here, or the pool of companies, is that to really make it in the world of therapeutics, you have to beat everyone in the world. It's a global business, and I think the VC-backed companies, there are some examples recently, Danish actually, raising large amounts early on, 40-50 million euro. And that's probably and arguably what it takes to really compete, to develop new drugs. I mean, and if you look at the accumulated amount of cash raised by therapeutics companies on the stock markets here, many of them, even after a number of years, do not get to that point of actually getting the money that it takes, arguably, to compete globally. And of course, you can say you're street smart, you're clever, you're quick, but those people who raise that kind of money are not necessarily stupid either. So I think we should have a bit of a reality check and ask ourselves, how many of the companies who are developing new drugs on the stock market are funded to do what it really takes to beat all those kind of people in Shanghai and
yeah, Jonas, I think you've hit the nail on the head. Is coming over here 8 years ago and working in Europe, it became obvious to me that people were raising too small of amount of money. And in this public market, just as Saniona is the example where I'm chair, it's very difficult to raise the kind of money that's necessary to drive something. Once you get to the clinical stage, serious clinical stage, and you have a drug that works, you need serious money. And because you still have to find your way, you've got CMC to do. There's so many things to do, especially in rare diseases where you have a relatively rapid path, but you need a lot of you need $100 or $150 million in a relatively short period of time. And there are rare examples of people raising significant money in Europe. And argenx is a good example. When I joined that board in 2015, they had just got listed on the Euronext. And the Euronext is a relatively illiquid market for small biotech companies. And it took a while to get the company to realize we needed to go to the US investors because you have many, many more investors. And in our last financing, we raised $1.15 billion last February. And it's an example of, that allows us to go into 10 indications with a drug that works in the autoimmune area. And now that's on a large scale, but it's all the way down the whole spectrum. I think it's important to figure out how to use the value of European investors and I think the European ecosystem from a technology standpoint, from the quality of the people in these companies, it's very high quality. We have VCs that are working. You can't tell the difference between the European VCs and the US VCs. There are some very high quality VCs. So we've come a long way just since I used to bring my company over from the US to try to get European money. It was impossible to get European money. They wanted risk taken out. I come out and tell my CFO, don't they know it's biotech? Because they always wanted more risk taken out. And that's changed pretty dramatically in the last 20 years. And I agree with Adam. We do have, we need to figure this market in Sweden is here to stay. It's successful. Now, how do we help those companies? How do we influence the maturation, even though they're not in VC, there are not enough VCs to get matured by. So, we need people like Lena that are willing to do it over and over again.
Yeah. So I have a comment.
Go ahead, Stefan.
So we participated in the Series B of IO Biotech, 127 million euros earlier this year, which by all means is an impressive amount. Even in the US, that would not be a very small amount. And as you say, Jonas, this is what it takes when you're in phase 2B and you have multiple programs. This type of money can be raised. It is certainly possible. The syndicate was full of very good European and US investors. To do this, you need the local anchor investors. And I'm not saying we were the only local, but there are the local VCs, but they're very important because a US investor would look for a local anchor investor. And I'm just saying that it's possible to do this round. I think we're going to see more and more of it because our colleagues in the European and the US venture funds, they have got their eyes on the great innovation here. Mm-hmm. And this is something, if you're a public company and you're listed on First North, the access to this is not there because that's a different type of investor, right? You talked, Don, about the US, especially, or generalist investors. They can deploy this kind of capital, but we haven't. There are very few examples of First North companies or even Spotlight where they raise the type of money that really sort of bring them to solid inflection points in phase 2B. So a company has to be aware of it. I'm not saying a listing is not good, and it can certainly be right, and there are many you can create a lot of value, but you have to realize if that is the path you take too early, maybe you shut yourself out from this sources of significant capital from international venture.
Jonas, you wanted to make a point.
Well, first of all, I agree again with what Stefan is saying, but also the point about the substantial amounts. I think it's important to look for examples. I mean, we have something like 200 companies listed on the stock market in Stockholm that is life science, so widely defined. But in terms of finding examples, the ones that will make a big difference, there is Calliditas that we mentioned, dual listing, raising substantial amounts and being ready for going to market. And it's such an important example because there aren't that many. There's Hansa, of course, Biopharma. There's BioArctic, Oncopeptides, where we are large owners, as we are in Calliditas as well. Oncopeptides is in choppy waters, but those are the examples that really will guide the market for better or worse. I think we should recognize how much hinges on those, literally a handful of cases. And then there's Cantargia, which is an example I like a lot because they have climbed from way down there. We met them way back when they were very small and very weak, and they raised substantial amounts and developed very well. But I think if you're a CEO, you have a great company, a great project, and you look at the system and you try to find a clever way forward, you should look at the examples and you will find that there aren't that many, and you should try to learn from them and see and map yourself against them. Do I have what it takes? And what are the VC trends? And I would also add that, yes, there are not that many VC fund specialists in life sciences, but there are more than before. New have come on, such as Ayer, of course. And I think the Europeans, I mean, they're raising very large funds. And when you have a very large fund, you will be willing to travel digitally all the way up here. And they do have their eyes on the ecosystem here, just like Stefan is saying. And that is a great opportunity. So again, the system that Adam is describing is fantastic and unique and very powerful. But there are alternatives, there is competition. And I think it's picking up from the VC side, which is great for everyone in this system. And if you're a CEO of a company or a project, you really should ask yourself, what can I do to fit what the VCs are looking for? Not all the way, of course. It's a negotiation and a fight, but really look at that example, that alternative very closely.
And,
yeah, I think that's good advice. Adam?
Yeah, just to jump into the conversation, I think, again, I'm not the expert, so by no means, but if I make a comparable, if I look at many of the technology companies that are coming to market now on First North, we're seeing a very interesting trend. They're not supported necessarily by VCs or established investors in the primary round when they do the IPO, but once they've proven and they've gained traction, we see a lot of VCs or more established investors step into the secondary round and really support them in the public market. And I think from that perspective, the question is, how do you give, visibility to good ideas, and good entrepreneurs and good management? And of course, some are in that sweet lane or sweet spot in terms of, having previous success behind them or previous track records and extremely good network, and many don't have that. And I think whilst VC is struggling maybe to support those smaller initiatives, the question is, how do you get private money to be active in the public markets to support good ideas and to really give them the funding they're looking for? Because at the end of the day, I also agree that at the end, is it better theoretically to raise $100 million right away to do the whole life cycle rather than to start by, raising 2 million, 5 million, 10, 25, et cetera, But the issue here is that many companies end up raising 100 million, but they do it over a life cycle of 5-6 years, whilst you have many companies that have the whole management team in the backing and they do it overnight. So the question is, what is right, what is wrong? Not for me to judge, but to just take the one piece of the equation, a piece of the pie away, is not the solution. The question is, how do you strengthen the good ideas that are there and really create a broader platform? And at the end of the day, I go back to the point that this is risk capital. This is about replacing VCs or private funding, because that's essentially what's happening in First North.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, Adam. And well, I want to thank everyone for, we're just about finished here. I want to thank everyone for being open and being very helpful to our audience about this question about whether you go public or not. And like most things, it's not black and white. And you've heard the lessons around there's value in putting your company privately around smart money, if you will, and with people who can help mature the company, get it lined up right, get it focused on the right commercial opportunities, get its messaging right. That's not always available to everyone. As an example, the company Saniona wouldn't be here today if it hadn't been able to come up through this Nordic market because the venture people just weren't interested in those technologies then. So I think, and we're fortunate to have many more serial entrepreneurs now, like Lena, who have done this over and over again, and hopefully we'll just continue to have that, and they can help these companies get out of that sort of low cap land where there's not quite enough money to be able to move the company forward. So thank you very much, and I really appreciate it. And thanks to the audience for attending, and look forward to you at the rest of the meeting. Thank you, Josh.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Don. And thank you to all of our panel, to Stefan, to Jonas, to Lena, to Adam, for guiding through there. Some really interesting discussions. I think it flowed on very nicely from the opening presentation from McKinsey this morning, which dug into some of these issues, and indeed some of the rest of the conversations later today. We'll be hearing from Adam later on for some of the public companies and on the sort of liquidity issue about this idea of cross-trading as well into the US and accessing US capital that way. So very much encourage people to join that session. And indeed, lots of other sessions we have going out the rest of this second day of content. So very shortly, in just under 10 minutes, we'll have our presentation on diversity in the life sciences ecosystem. followed by a panel on expediting translation into innovation, which again lends from the McKinsey presentation this morning, translating innovation more quickly into companies and then funding those companies. So moving on very nicely. And then our valuations masterclass at 1 o'clock, which I think also lends to a lot of the discussions this morning. So a huge thank you for all of our speakers for joining us this morning. Please do keep engaging on the platform. We have the live discussion that will stay open throughout the event, so you can follow up. And indeed, all of our speakers today and throughout the event are on the platform, hopefully to meet with, connect with, and continue the conversation. So with that, I'll close it off for this session and look forward to seeing you in just under 10 minutes on our next one. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Josh. Bye, everyone.
Very good.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.